Well, good morning, all. We're going to talk a little bit about, I guess this is the inaugural Mission in Motion presentation, so there will be more to follow. I don't have the full schedule, but today we're talking about Togo, West Africa. And what I want to do is just give you a little bit of an idea of what all went on during this trip. The first part, I'm going to talk a little bit about the Albinism project, and then also just some other things that I found out along the way going to Africa. So what I'm going to do is just cover a couple of things. Where is Togo? Why I went to Togo in particular. The Albinism project itself, which many of you probably saw in the church bulletin a while back when we were looking for donations. Some specifics of that trip, and then what I called other ahas from the Togo trip. So first, where is Togo? Well, it's West Africa, and in fact, so here's Africa. It's number 51. It doesn't even get its name up on this map, but number 51 on the map, sort of around inside here in the middle portion. So I'm going to pass this around. You can look for number 51. So that's where Togo is. I had never heard of Togo until about 23 years ago. And 23 years ago, my brother decided he wanted to go into the Peace Corps. And when he did, he was not eligible to go to most countries because of having asthma, but one of the countries they would allow was Togo. So all of a sudden, our family found out very heavily about Togo. It's in West Africa, as I mentioned. It was dictatorial at the time, so he was coming into a very complex political environment. But the reason I went to Togo is because my brother, while he was in West Africa, met and married a native Togolese woman. So I was actually going to visit extended family in going to Togo. And as Andy and I got to talking about going to Togo, because he and his family go about every 3 years. They try to go back, see the family, and so it's really a great chance for them. He's been working on me for about the last 2 or 3 trips to go along as well. And so I said, oh, would love to go. This seemed like the perfect time. The boys are now out of the house, at least off to college or ready to be. And so it was a good time for me to go. But when we talked about going, I said, well, what's our project? And he sort of looked at me, like, we're going to visit family. And my tendency when going to any country is to try to have some project. And this was no exception. So we're going to a developing country, and my brother said, well, my first thought is, what about water? Because water has been my theme up until now. Actually, water in the area where we were in Togo is in pretty plentiful supply. People can walk a short distance and get to their water. I'll talk a little more about that in a few minutes, but water is not a big problem. But he mentioned that there's a huge issue with this whole idea of people suffering from albinism. So we think about them, we characterize them as albinos. A lot of folks in the Togo area suffer from albinism. And so what we're going to do is talk a little bit about the Albinism project to start with, and then some other ahas at the end. Oh, Kim, would you get the lights, especially this one right here, is hitting the screen. It's that one there. There we go. Good. Thank you. So a little definition of albinism. First off, it's an inherited condition. All right. So present at birth, you don't get albinism from someone else except genetically. It's characterized by the lack of pigment. And the interesting thing here is that it's color to the skin, the hair, and the eyes. So a lot of times we think about the very light skin and maybe the hair or the eye coloring, but it can be any one of those things that can be lacking pigmentation to be an albinism. There are many types, so we're going to see it in varying degrees. The amount of pigment may be a little bit different. The condition's found in all races, so it's not unique to Africans, for instance. And the key here, or one of the keys, is it's frequently accompanied with eye problems. And we'll talk a little bit more about that in a moment. And it can also lead to skin cancer. It's a fairly rare disorder, and in the United States and in Europe, about 5 people per 100,000. But as you'll see, albinism is 4 times or more prevalent in southern Nigeria, and Togo, the levels in Togo are at least that bad. So while you're still, it's not as though you see someone suffering albinism every week when you're on the street, but in Togo, you're more likely to. And it becomes even more apparent because of the darkness of skin and the change in the pigmentation when you see someone who is suffering albinism in Togo. So we recognized that this was a problem at a higher level. And one of the biggest troubles is that we really wanted to get the word out to people about what albinism is and how it's affecting the community. So the first thing we had to decide, we have this issue that we want to address. We wanted to get the word out to those suffering albinism that we were going to be out doing something about it. And so what we did is we actually went on the radio. And we had a little advertisement telling those who suffer albinism to come to a local school on a market day. And market days are when everyone comes into a particular area to buy their yams and their other items for the week. It's basically a traveling Kroger store, okay? The market day in Bazaar, where we were staying, is on Saturdays. And so we went on the radio Thursday and Friday and said, we're going to be coming to this local school and we're going to be distributing products for anyone who suffers albinism. And we explained what albinism was, because to most folks there, they know that something's going on, but it's really just that they're different. These people who suffer albinism are different and almost outcast. And the way I thought about it, I put myself in a spot biblically of sort of almost like the lepers. They were actually had certain little areas where only the albinos were purported to live. All right, now that's not totally true, but in Africa, what is said is much more true because there isn't newspaper or other information, so word of mouth is very critical. All right, so we got the word out via the radio, and then the day of the event, when we actually had the folks suffering from albinism come in, the first thing we had to do was assess whether they really had albinism. All right. Now, folks in developing countries, the mere idea of having someone offering assistance is unusual. And so many of the people who came in on market day to see us weren't suffering from albinism. They might have had troubles with their eyes, so just the early stages of macular degeneration or other problems that could be going on, cataract problems. But so the first thing we had to do is say, are they really suffering from albinism? And so what we did, my brother here, Andy, would sit with the folks and he'd say, look off in the distance over there. Tell me what you see. And if they could see the sheep and the cows, then we knew that their vision wasn't as heavily affected as we thought it was, or they reported it to be. And so he would do a quick field assessment of whether or not there were in fact albinism problems to begin with. Because those who suffer albinism usually are nearsighted. All right, so there's a problem in terms of being able to see, and so we know that that's one way of assessing. Another way, of course, is just looking at the person. If you notice that the lack of pigmentation or the hair color, those kind of things can be enough to let you know that it's an albinism issue.